start with one. I know it went to one, they did, and they asked one a question, and everybody answered it, and then went to the next guy. Right. I don't know if that's the same. We'll see.
You go first, by the way.
I've been pushed off the edge quite a few times already in my lifetime. It won't be the first. It wouldn't. Just wouldn't.
Put you on that there.
Yeah, about a minute.
Am I going to get a 10-second countdown?
Forum debate. And then I got emails afterwards saying, oh, I wish I hadn't voted already for somebody else.
Oh.
Why are you watching the debate?
Good evening, and thank you for attending tonight's legislative forum brought to you by University of Louisiana at Lafayette, the College of Liberal Arts, as well as the Power Coalition. What is the Power Coalition? The Power Coalition is a coalition for equity and justice that works to build voice and power in communities. We are a coalition of groups from across Louisiana whose mission is to organize in impacted communities, educate and turn out voters, and fight for policies that create a more equitable and just system here in Louisiana. Our message is simple. Your voice matters. You have power, and your vote counts. So tonight we encourage you to become a power voter. We have a table in the back here, and that power voter means that you will take a pledge to vote in every election, to participate in the 2020 census, and to hold your elected officials accountable. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce to you tonight our moderator for tonight's event. Dr. Pearson Cross is the Associate Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and an Associate Professor in the Department of Political Science here at UL Lafayette. His principal areas of teaching and research are state and local politics and Louisiana politics. He is a frequent commentator on political issues for news media at the national, state, and local levels. Dr. Cross has a twice-weekly radio show called Bayou to the Beltway on KRVS 88.7 FM that focuses on current state and local politics and issues. Dr. Cross received his BA from San Francisco State University in 1985 and his PhD from Brandeis University in Massachusetts in 1997. So let's get this forum started. Dr. Cross.
Thank you, Kelly. It's always great to see you in the Power Coalition, something I knew less about than I do now, and I'm looking forward to putting that sign in my yard. You know, it's things we can stand up for. Get involved, stay involved. Welcome to the Louisiana Legislative Forum. I'm Pearson Cross. We are focusing tonight on districts 31, 43, and 45, which take in a good bit of Lafayette Parish. This forum is sponsored by the College of Liberal Arts here at UL Lafayette and by Power Coalition, as you just heard. AOC Community Media is recording this event and will post it for viewers on their YouTube channel, although it is, in fact, being live streamed right now. We thank them and we thank you for coming and for your interest in our state government. We'll welcome 7 candidates to the stage tonight. They are running for the state legislature in 3 districts. Only one of the candidates is an incumbent tonight. In tonight's forum, I will ask the candidates questions relevant to their roles in the legislature. These questions were prepared by the College of Liberal Arts and the Power Coalition. They were not shared with the candidates prior to the forum. At the end of the prepared questions, we will have, time permitting, a lightning round, and then, more time permitting, questions from the audience. Each candidate will have the opportunity to make a 1-minute opening statement before we begin the questions. Once the questioning starts, we will allow 90 seconds for each response, proceeding from left to right, candidate to candidate, until all the candidates have answered the question. If any candidate is directly challenged by name, he or she will have 30 seconds to respond to that challenge. As I said, we'll have a lightning round, I hope, and then if we have time, we'll follow with closing statements and or questions from the audience. Our timekeeper is Sally Donnellan at the back. That is Assistant Dean Sally Donnellan from the College of Liberal Arts, and as you may notice, she has a some lights back there, a green light and a yellow light and a red light. When the green light goes on, you can start talking. Yellow light is 30 seconds, and red light is you've reached the end. Okay, so I am hopeful that you'll be able to see that. Well, let's dive right into those opening statements. So right now for the opening statements, we'll start at this end of the table and move that way. So Mr. Dore, you're up.
Yes, good evening. My name is Jim Dore, and I'm running for state representative for District 31, which is an open seat that Nancy Landry previously held. I grew up here in Louisiana, born and raised. Grew up actually in the oil and gas industry with a company called Global Divers, which later became Global Industries. I have 3 children, one in New Orleans, 2 here, all 3 grown. I have 3 grandchildren here, and one in Gulf Shores, Alabama. The question is, why am I running? I had retired some years ago. I returned here to Lafayette after our first grandchild. I began watching and seeing and hearing a lot of what's happening in Baton Rouge and here locally. It became a serious concern for me, and then it became really a very easy decision for me to run when I began to think about the future of our kids and our grandchildren. So that's really what drove me. I'm no longer operating a business, but I do work with CEOs here in the Acadiana area, working on their businesses, helping them decide on what may be happening within their organizations, and then working through issues with them. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Mr. Dore, and also running in District 31, Mr. Jonathan Gouda.
Thank you for having me. Lifelong resident of Lafayette Parish, a husband to my wonderful wife, Dawn. I've got 3 kids, 3 grandkids. The law enforcement side comes from my son. He's with the Lafayette Sheriff's Department. His wife's an educator, and then my daughter's a veterinarian, and her husband's a captain with the fire department in Lafayette. And my 3rd son is with the oil and gas industry. I say these things because these areas are vital to our community. It's something that we need to focus on. It's hurting right now, and we need to bring this back to our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Also running in District 31, Mr. Gus Rance.
Thank you very much. I'm Gus Rance. I've made my living in turning around failed hospitals, failed companies, and in doing so, I've learned one inevitable truth. In order to change your future, you have to stop doing what you've been doing. Louisiana needs new vision. We need new leadership. As I said, my career has been spent in healthcare, and I can tell you it's broken. Patients are not the priority, and that has to change, and that can change. Our roads. I've driven my RV with my family all over this country. Louisiana's roads are awful, and they don't have to be. They shouldn't flood, what's becoming annually. We have to fix our drainage issues. On taxation, no one hates paying taxes more than me, but it's doubly aggravating watching our state fall further behind. We pay the most and we get the least. But all of this can change. It's really not that complicated. If something's a priority, then make it a priority. Act like it's a priority. Most importantly, fund it like it's a priority. I'm asking for the opportunity to help lead this great state to the greatness that it's capable of. I'm Gus Rance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rance. And now also a District 31 candidate, Ms. Quinta Thompson.
Hi, I'm Quinta Thompson. I'm not originally from Lafayette. I'm from the big city of New Iberia. When I was 7 years old, I told my parents I wanted to major in political science, and foolishly they let me. So I came out here to USL and majored in political science. And I loved Lafayette so much, I thought it was just so grand. I decided to stay here for the rest of my life. I've often found issues with things, and so I jumped in and helped. Then I considered people who didn't vote. I didn't understand why they thought they had a right to complain if they weren't going to step up and vote. And then I figured out, as a voter, I had no right to complain if I wasn't going to step up and do something. So that's why I decided to run. I believe everyone can make a difference. I'm actually so excited that all of my opponents are here today, because to me it just shows that we're all passionate about our district. And believe it or not, I love that. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Next, we'll hear from the candidate from District 43, Ms. Leslie Bork.
Hi, I feel like I could just ditto Jim Dore's story. Or part of it, the beginning. I am born and raised in Lafayette, Louisiana, and I moved away at the age of 26 and returned home 3.5 years ago with my family. I have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. One of the reasons why my family chose to move to my hometown of Lafayette was because we really felt that Louisiana and Lafayette especially had a special quality of life. Of course, there's the spirit of Cajun culture and all that entails, but we really thought that this would be an ideal place to raise our kids. After being home, I realized that I was a little disappointed in the quality of life. When we have a broken education system and roads that are flooding and drainage that hasn't been addressed in years, that's something that I felt needed to, I needed to step up and do more than just be a citizen. So I became a concerned citizen. I got active in the community, and I think I have earned the respect as a community leader and activism.
Thank you, Ms. Borg. Okay. Turning on to now, I just want to remind you that in the back, there are those lights back there, and when they get to red, that means you're done. Okay? Thank you.
I've never been one to talk too much, though.
District 45 candidates next. We're going to start with Mr. Jean-Paul Cousin.
Thank you, Dr. Cross, and thank you for inviting me tonight. It's hard to tell you no when you actually ask me in my driveway, so thank you for
them down.
pushing the envelope. But I appreciate you letting me join the panelists. Serving in office, this would be my second term, is a heck of a thing nowadays with social media. And one of those things we have to deal with is social media. And so a quick shout out to all those Twitter trolls out there. I got told one time that I looked like the Lego character, the head guy. So what was nice was that my kids now ask me what world I'm saving today, and I say I'm only trying to save Louisiana. So this second term, I'm going to focus on the same thing that we focused on the first term: jobs, 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 infrastructure, including flood mitigation funding that comes somewhat through the state. There's other ways to get it to that we're going to continue to help the locals and the federals get to where we need to get. And then finally, sanctity of life issues for the unborn and also our Second Amendment rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cousin. And last but not least, for District 45, Ms. Rhonda Gleason.
Thank you, Dr. Cross. I appreciate the opportunity to speak here at ULL. Quinte, thanks. In fact, I'm from Lafayette. I've been an educator in the district, actually, for 15 years. My father coached and taught at Acadiana High School. My grandfather was here. He was the ROTC Air Force Commander, and he was Education Department Director. And so this is like a second home to me. I am running for the legislature for one reason, and it is for the youth in our community, to give them a place to stay, to call home, because we can talk about jobs, we can talk about life issues, but the truest sanctity of life is a place where you feel welcome, a place where you have prosperity, and a place that you know that your integrity is valued. And that is why I'm running for the legislative seat in my district. Thanks, Pearson.
Thank you, Mrs. Gleason. We are now moving on to the questions. We're going to start with Mr. Dore. You have 90 seconds for each one of these questions. And again, I direct your attention to the lights in the back if you have any question about where you are. The candidates have not had these questions shared with them, so we'll start off with Mr. Dore. The $500 million surplus from the last fiscal year has emerged as one of the hottest topics of this election season. The legislature will have two choices: either reduce that surplus and return government operating books closer to a zero balance, or spend that money on infrastructure debt reduction and restoring the rainy day fund. Which option would you support, and what steps would you take to get there? Mr. Dore.
Yes, thank you for the question. With the $500 million surplus, it for me would be a relatively easy decision, and that is to spend money more on the infrastructure that we have. It's very vital to our economy. If we want to have any means of creating and developing and bringing new industry and business here, we have to have a highway system or railroad systems. We have to have roads and bridges that are actually functional and that we have the ability for them to move their products. Beyond that, there's another issue that concerns me, and that is when I meet with the agricultural folks, the farmers, the gentlemen and women who have sugarcane and rice and cattle and even crawfish farmers. Many of them are in rural areas and rural roads. If we don't take care in maintaining the infrastructure we have, in particular some of the bridges and roadways that we have, it would be devastating if they were to lose one. If they were not able to move their product to get it to the sugarcane processing plants, it would take time, money, and energy away from them, and it would take some of their employees and put them aside and not having the ability to actually make money as well. So infrastructure for me is extremely important, as I said, for the economy of our area, not just Lafayette, but for Louisiana in general. So my money and my effort would be focusing more on infrastructure to get us back up to speed.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Godot, would you spend the money or would you return the operating books to a zero balance?
Great question. That money needs to be turned back to the taxpayers. Again, we don't need to keep raising taxes. That needs to be put back in there. A portion of that can go to infrastructure, roads, bridges. Lake Charles is a huge area right now with a big problem over there, so that needs to be taken care of. My constituents, speaking with my constituents, businesses wild too, drainage is a big issue. So those two areas right there need to be focused on in addition to give that money back to the people.
As a follow-up, the 45-cent sales tax increase has been a bone of contention ever since it was passed, that extra sales tax that's accounted for something of the surplus. Are you for eliminating that half-cent tax before it expires in 2023 or letting it run its course?
It needs to be eliminated.
Eliminated. Okay, thank you. Mr. Rentz, same question?
A lot of the problems that we have today is because we haven't planned for the future. We've eliminated the rainy day fund. We've raided a lot of coffers, and we really haven't had much to show for it. I believe that at this magic moment, we have the money. We have a heck of a lot of projects that need to be done. We have a lot of people who need to be helped. It'd be silly to trust government to return it in any meaningful way while we have so many things outstanding. That being said, I mean, coupled with the HUD money that we're supposed to be getting, which is somewhere on the order of $600 million specifically dedicated to drainage, we ought to be able to eliminate a lot of problems. We have thousands of people who still, quite frankly, are hurting from some of this almost annual flooding. That needs to be mitigated. We have some ideas. The Corps of Engineers has given us some dredging plans. And we're talking about tens of millions of dollars and alleviating thousands of people's pain. I think right now at this magic moment that money's better spent, tackling the issues that are facing the people.
Okay. What about that 0.45 cents?
I'd love to ultimately get rid of it. I think right now we have a lot of problems standing in the way. I think we need to pretty much rein in government, prioritize what we're going to be spending money on. I don't think people necessarily hate the concept of taxes generally. They hate the waste of our government, I think, more than anything else, is at least what I'm hearing. So if we can come up with a comprehensive plan to bring some priorities, bring some principles, bring some accountability into government, I believe firmly we should be able to eliminate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Same question, Ms. Thompson?
Okay, thank you. I feel that we should spend the money. We've all talked about plenty of the same issues up here, the infrastructure, definitely the drainage. It's costing us money in the long run with higher flood insurance rates, constantly having to improve our homes sometimes on our own dime because we're not getting what's promised from some of the insurance companies. Also, our education system is pretty far down there in the country, and I don't think that balancing the budget is going to help bring more money into the state. I think at this point, we need to spend the surplus and invest in the state and invest in the people, and that would be the best way to return the money to the people. I was somewhat confused by Mr. Godot's answer. I wasn't sure which side you were leaning on. I'm sorry. Could you clarify that for me?
30 seconds, Mr. Godot, to respond.
Leaning on what side?
I didn't understand you answering the question either way. It sounded almost like you said both.
And then the money needs to be returned back to the people.
Okay, and then you spoke about spending on infrastructure. That's what I was confused by. That's all.
Yeah, with all the road problems we have, infrastructure, correct. And it needs to be, look, I've spent almost 2 years speaking to my constituents, businesses and residential. So I'm gonna be the voice of my people, and this is what they're wanting.
Okay, I don't mean any offense by it. I just didn't understand your answer, and I was asking for you to clarify it for me personally. Because if I don't win this election, I will be one of your constituents.
Okay.
And I'd like to hold you accountable.
Okay, that's fine.
All right, thank you. Same question, Ms. Bork.
So I believe infrastructure and infrastructure and infrastructure. I have been canvassing and talking to the constituents in District 43, and that is the number one thing on their minds. They are fearful every time it rains. We all know this. I feel like roads, we are trying to get people to come and live in our state, and they drive to the state, and the roads are awful. There are plenty of other reasons why they might not be moving to our state, but that is a huge factor, I think. But definitely drainage. 2016 was one of the worst floods, and if we have the money, we should spend the money on what our constituents are really, really asking for, and that is that we mitigate and try to reduce flooding.
So you would be in favor of keeping the 0.45 cent sales tax?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cusson, remember we started this question with the question about the $500 million surplus that we have. So what to do with that, return it to voters or to spend it on different kinds of infrastructure?
Well, first, we're required by our Constitution to spend the $500 million in certain areas, including funding our rainy day fund, paying down some debt, and several other areas covered by our Constitution. This year, I voted to eliminate the 0.45% sales tax that was added 2 years ago. We were sold a bill of goods relative to the quote-unquote fiscal cliff that didn't actually come to pass. And so now we're dealing with not just a rounding error, but a $500 million surplus. So beyond what we're required to do by the Constitution, I'll once again vote to eliminate the additional 0.45 cents. I believe the bill got out of the House and was killed in the Senate. And then the bill, it may come in various forms. It may eliminate it over a shorter amount of time. It may do it immediately. And so once we see those bills and understand their fiscal impact on the state and looking at the immediate projects that may have been bonded out this year, then we'll understand how quickly we could roll the 0.45 cents off the book.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cusson. Ms. Gleason, same question.
Well, I believe that we pay back to our community from this surplus. We pay them back by obligating ourselves to listen to what the constituency really wants and to making those promises to the end. If we have a tax that's on the books and that will expire, then you see it through to the end. The issue that I have with arguing about the trajectory of these taxes and how do we deal with a surplus? The issue that I have is the impasse that continues in the legislature and between the governor's intentions and the legislature itself. So before we even address that, we have to have a working body of government. Personally, I think that we know where we can put that money to good work. I know that if we have an obligated tax, we'll see it out to the end, and then we go on to the next bill, the next legislation when we need to.
Okay, thank you very much. We are now moving on to question 2. We're going to start with Mr. Godot. Jonathan Godot, my bad. Mr. Godot, roads across Louisiana are in desperate shape, and several bridges are in such disrepair that citizens and businesses face personal and economic risk every time they use them. All told, the Department of Transportation estimates there's a $14 billion backlog of infrastructure projects. Does your plan to address this critical shortfall include an addition to the current per-gallon gas tax? If you're not going to get any more money out of the gas tax, how do you plan to pay for needed infrastructure investments in roads and bridges?
Great question. First of all, I've been saying for months now, we don't need to keep raising taxes. You bring jobs into the state. That's going to not only create the jobs, but also brings the revenue that we're going to need to fund these projects. Second thing is they need to stop reallocating funds. When you ask the voters to vote for something, you're asking them to trust in you to do that, to do the right thing with the money keeps getting reallocated. That needs to stop.
Are there other pressing infrastructure needs besides roads and bridges that you, not counting drainage, that you think you would like to focus on?
Education is a big one as well, too. And I got, again, law enforcement is passionate to me. Not only my son's in there now, but my 19 years of law enforcement. And then also, we need to attract businesses. I've had my small business now for 28 years. So using some of that money to attract businesses back to Louisiana, keeping our families here is important.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rance, same question.
Yeah, you mentioned the backlog, and that's something we always talk about, but we don't ever talk about a lot of the inefficiencies of the Department of Transportation, the over 4,000 employees, and the reallocation of resources. Clearly, we have limited capital. It doesn't matter what we raise a tax to. We're going to have limited capital. We have to prioritize, and our priorities should be what helps the state at large, and not only what helps the state, but what also helps the state deliver an economic return on our investment. There's a lot of reasons why people don't want to relocate here. There's a lot of reasons why industry isn't here, and our roads are very high on that list. We have parts of the interstate that flood regularly. We've got crumbling bridges in Baton Rouge and Lake Charles. We've got a tremendous state and a tremendous opportunity, but as long as we make it virtually impossible for any meaningful expansion of jobs, they're not going to come. If that means a public-private partnership, then that may be what it means. I'm not going to rule anything out at this point, but I think there's a lot of efficiencies to be had with the money that we're currently bringing into the capital.
Are there other infrastructure needs other than drainage that you might want to focus on as well, besides roads and drainage, anything else?
Roads and drainage tend to be the largest one. Obviously, we've got major issues with our ports and dredging as well, which are giant economic drivers. But for my constituents in this area, we find that it's going to be roads and drainage from an infrastructural standpoint.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Thompson?
Yes, I do agree that our roads and bridges need to be fixed. I do feel sometimes that I stay in Lafayette a lot of times because I'm afraid to go to Texas or go to Baton Rouge because of the bridges we have, and I'm taking my life in my hand every time I cross over them. But I also want the quality of life here to be so great that I don't have the need to go elsewhere. Of course, everyone is saying roads and drainage, great, but we also have blighted areas here in our community that I think we need to reinvest in. I think we need to stop making excuses for businesses to come here, use our resources, use our people, and then once their tax break has been eliminated, they leave. We need to make it so appealing. We need to invest in the people here, invest in our laborers becoming skilled and highly skilled, and make it appealing, wanting them to come here and create those jobs rather than us dangling a carrot to entice them. I think that would be a way of funding more projects here. Also, definitely improving our schools. I'm an educator. I'm a high school mathematics teacher, and I see that these kids are not ready for the real world because they're leaving thinking that everyone is going to have some golden job waiting for them because they keep hearing about the oil industry here. Well, it's great if you want to go work in the oil industry, but we need people who can work in the oil industry to be able to go there.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Ms. Bork, same question.
Yeah, I think that we need to start thinking outside of the box and being fiscally responsible. And when we're allocating funds, I don't necessarily think that generating more funds for our state means that we need to increase taxes. We do pay one of the second highest, I believe, sales tax and a really low property tax. I feel that we could streamline our revenue better and really focus on what we do pay and the funding that we have, but reallocate funds. Is there a way that we can manipulate it better or try to, raise more property tax and lower sales tax? I believe I think transparency in government, people want to know where their taxes are going to. They don't mind so much paying a tax that the roads are going to be better and there's going to be, drainage. However, I think that when it comes to programs like ITAP and other programs that are just giving a lot away, I don't think that as a state, Louisiana can afford that. We are a poor state, unfortunately, and I believe that when we do give out these incentives, which we should, these exemptions, but we need to do a cost-benefit analysis and really, really make sure that the corporations we are giving money, are giving exemptions to, or actually bringing in jobs and creating revenue for our state, jobs from people in Louisiana, not outside. So.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cousin?
Thank you. I think the first step that we've started walking down the path towards is putting the trust back in the Transportation Trust Fund. In 2016, Representative Landry from Lafayette filed a bill which ultimately passed, which reduced the amount of money that the state police could take out of the Transportation Trust Fund. That, after many years of tens of millions of dollars being directed to the state police, wherein the public was thinking that this money was going more towards roads and bridges. The following couple of years, Senator Cortez, also from Lafayette, as chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee, filed a bill which was a constitutional amendment to eliminate the state police from the Transportation Trust Fund. We passed it out of the legislature, you all voted on it, and we passed that in the state of Louisiana. So now those funds are not just limited, but they're eliminated, which is increasing the funds that actually go towards the priorities in the TTF. Finally, we passed another constitutional amendment out of the legislature that the public voted on, you all voted on, that basically stated if there was a gas tax increase, which we have not ever voted on, that those funds would go directly to the infrastructure, the roads and the bridges. So that's also an important step of gaining the trust of the people. But we also have to get creative. One of those things that we found this year was $700 million from the BP Settlement Fund, which was non-coastal restoration funds. Those funds were rededicated towards major projects across the state. Here in Lafayette, we have a $150 million project that was shovel-ready that is going to basically fund the overpass on Highway 90 and Ambassador Caffrey. Major step on the I-49 South corridor. I look forward to working with our delegation moving forward to continue to work on infrastructure projects that we can creatively finance, and as the economy grows, we'll have more money to do so.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cousin. Ms. Gleason?
Our most important piece of infrastructure in this state has to do with our workforce. That connects to education, that connects to our families, and I do believe that we need to focus on those elements of our infrastructure. We are always going to be indebted to our oil and gas industry. That is how we've gotten as far as we have so far. But we should be so much further now. We have stepped aside and allowed a lot of our revenue to just slip between our fingers. When there's an opportunity to start to address options like green energy, which is happening across the country and across the world, we need to take a step forward and try to remove Louisiana from the top of the worst list, the bottom of the best list. We're in a perpetual state, and we sit around wondering, why are we this way? It's because we vote the same way. We are letting our legislative body sort of drive us here and there, and our eyes are closed. We need to pay attention to what's going on in the legislature. We need to pay attention to what our real infrastructure is, and that's us in Louisiana. Thanks.
All right, thank you. And finally, Mr. Dore.
Yeah, thank you, Pearson. I think your question was about the $14 billion backlog.
It was, yes.
And the roads that are in disparable shape and the like. And you know, where I come from a company that ran projects. I operate through processes. That's just the way I kind of came up in business. And you know, when we're approaching DOT and we're talking about backlog and what's happening with the DOT issues and that, and the $14 billion, it's a lot bigger than making a few cuts. It includes a process by which we have to take a look at first look at your budget, determine what's right and what's wrong within that budget, make sure you have the right people in the right seats on the bus, cut where you can, prioritize your projects, and then you have to decide how you're going to begin accumulating your cash. Raising taxes is always the last issue in raising, effort, if you will, in raising funds. For me, it's about prioritizing the projects, but it's bigger than just roads and bridges. I was doing a little research, and we have thousands and thousands of people in Louisiana that don't have internet. We have hundreds and hundreds of people who don't have cable. In fact, I have someone here with me now doesn't have access to cable television. This is archaic in Louisiana. So we have other things other than roads and bridges, and of course, it was mentioned, ports, which are vital to our economy. We need to make sure that they're funded, that the rivers and byways are taken care of. When I look at other associations within what we're doing with the budget processes, it was mentioned earlier that in order for us to raise taxes or raise more money, we have to have a good educational system that ties with workforce development. It's the only way we're going to be able to attract new business. New business is going to be the ones that are going to help us with paying some of those taxes in our economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dore. We're moving on to the next question, and this question is going to go first to Mr. Gus Rance. Louisiana began taking steps to reduce its prison population in 2017, and because of this, we no longer have the highest incarceration rate in the world. If you are in favor of these recent actions, what would you do to continue the process? Otherwise, what would you have done differently in 2017, and what would you propose doing differently in the future?
The concept of prison reform, I think, is something that everybody universally should ultimately be behind the state of Louisiana. We do incarcerate a heck of a lot of people. That's not to say that criminals should be let out of jail. I think our entire system nationwide, not just in Louisiana, is failing society at large. We've got prison sentences that, quite frankly, are too long a lot of times and too easy. It should not be a place that you ever want to go again. It should be a horrible experience, and you should learn your lesson. That being said, I do believe in second chances. Many people in my life, my family, have been given second chances, and they made the most of it. I don't believe in 15th chances. So I think looking at overhauling the entire system is very important. As I mentioned, we need to do a better job with our prisoners. When we let them out of prison, we claim that they've paid their debt to society, but they wear a scarlet letter for the rest of their life. I don't think that's a good societal plan. We need to be re-educating and reacclimating people. We don't need to be making them PhDs in crime. I'm assuming that's not what yours is in, Pearson. But so I think there's definitely a need for some reform. I don't know that we did that in the 16-17 legislation. I haven't seen that that's really anything that anybody was trying to do other than just get some headlines. I'd like to see some major changes.
Yeah, they didn't instruct a lot about crime at Brandeis, but thank you very much. Next, Ms. Thompson, same question.
Okay, I do believe that it's a good move to reduce our prison sentence. Our prison population. Some sentences do not necessarily fit the crime. I think that certain things like maybe marijuana usage should be decriminalized. I also think that our prisons are there to be reformatories, not just prison reform, but reforming the prisoners. We want them to come back into society and, like Mr. Rance said, be able to be productive members of the society, not to have that scarlet letter on them. I completely agree with that. So we need to be able to actually introduce them back into a world that they're familiar with. People going to jail for decades for nonviolent crimes and then coming back out into a world of technology that they've never, ever experienced gives them no choice but to commit more crimes and go back to a place that they're familiar with. It shouldn't be a place that they want to return, but it should also be not just a punishment, but a learning experience, and give them a chance to not only pay their debt to society from time spent there, but how they can come back and be a productive member of our society.
Speaking of that, do you think that a 5-year waiting period following release is long enough or too long with regard to voting?
I think, again, it would be depending on the crime.
Interesting. Okay. Ms. Bork?
So I think basically Louisiana has massively grown in incarceration, and our parole eligibility is reduced or eliminated. So you're basically having a life sentence anyway. What I am vehemently against is prison for profit. And I feel like that is something that our state definitely needs to pay attention to. These people that are committing less violent crimes and are doing, major time is at the taxpayer's expense. So I know that is, I've worked with programs with Kelly Garrett and also Vote. Consuela Gaines is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the prison system, and I also think that we need to I don't want to say take care of our prisoners, but especially those that are doing less violent crimes, and make sure that they do come back into our society as healthy and have a strong sense of family. I think that's what, if they I know they're doing things where their personal phone calls are being charged. They're being charged, and I feel like if we're trying to negate having a family relationship, then that's something that when they, you need to have that strong family bond. So.
Thank you, Ms. Bork. Mr. Couson?
Thank you. President Trump's son-in-law has actually looked at Louisiana as a success story relative to our criminal justice reform. I'm not quite there yet. We have our Senator Kennedy and also our Attorney General who have highlighted some of the issues with some of the releases. Relative to the actual statutes that were proposed, I think I voted for 8 out of 10. So we were on board with reducing the population and getting us out of that number one bad list, as we all discussed. I think now there's a question of what are the procedures that we're supposed to follow, whether they will be followed, whether the violent criminals, if they're actually sentenced as violent criminals, or whether or not the actual penalties have been reduced through the process of their prosecution, whether they're being captured as violent criminals or billed under some other crime. I think that has to be looked at. What individually, what are these people accused of doing, and what are they sentenced? What law are they sentenced under? The other big issue is the reinvestment side, and I think we've missed the mark a little bit on the reinvestment side. We really need to hold each of these agencies to account. I believe we should be funding more of the district attorneys and some of our defense budgets through some of the reinvestment. I don't think I've seen that yet, and if we're doing that, we need to have accountability and transparency. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Gleason?
So in Louisiana specifically, we have a couple of prison issues. One is the prisons for profit issue. We should not be playing a game with what's going on in the national narrative regarding the prison industry as part of a profit-making industry for certain folks in this state or across the country. So, number one, I don't believe in the prisons for profit industry. I do have a secondary issue regarding the boost in the immigration detention facilities. In the last year, we've gone from 1 to 43 campuses, prisons in Louisiana that are housing our immigrants from the border, and that is very questionable to me. Where we had prisons, we've got this really wonderful criminal justice reform impetus that I 100% back. But then we've got this influx of detention facilities. Is there a correlation there? Is there a connection there? I'm not sure. But I really don't appreciate this construct of privatizing prisons and making millions of dollars off of our inmates. And I also think that 5 years is too long to reinstate voting rights.
All right, thank you. Mr. Dore?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'm one of those that come from a long history of what's called safety. So we actually do preventive things in order for us to keep things from happening. So in the first place, I think we need to have a much stronger educational system so that when kids are growing up, they have a decision to make that they're going to take either right fork or the left fork. And so we need to have a much more robust educational system so young people get out today, they can find jobs, they can feel good about themselves, and not have to take the wrong fork in the road. That's the first thing. The other thing I'd like to talk about, though, would be the whole idea of addressing sentencing. I think we need to address what we're doing now and currently with sentencing and how we're doing it and how we're going about it. I think we need to look at how we're actually addressing paroles and the consideration for paroles. I think that I'd like to take a harder look at non-life-threatening and non-violent type criminals and those who've been incarcerated, and determine if they're non-violent, how do we address that issue? What do we do with them? Are they really those types of individuals that we should not be able to let loose back into society? I do believe that we need to look hard at that. The other thing I think we really have to work on is a good transition plan that gets them ready to be released back into our society and utilize new technologies that we have with them. The problem that I've seen and I've witnessed personally in attending your vote meetings is the fact that we have people right now, they get out, they're no longer incarcerated, they can't find a job, they can't get a job, they can't get an apartment, and that to me is infuriating. Now what we're doing is exacerbating the problem. So we have to really work hard on making sure we can transition people back into our society properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dore. And for final on this question, Mr. Godot.
Thank you. Again, in my 19 years of law enforcement, there needs to be some criminal justice reform. It's very, very frustrating. On not only did I serve 3 years in the local correctional facility, but also the rest of the time on patrol. And I can tell you, within the correctional facility, there are programs in place to rehabilitate these criminals, which is a good thing. They do deserve a second chance. What's frustrating is when you make an arrest on the streets, they're out before you can even finish your paperwork. They come back in, they're called career criminals. They're going to come back in because they get medical, they get food, they get dental, they get other stuff. So we need to really focus on what's the problem once they're released. What kind of solutions can we come up with to make this less desirable for them to want to come back into their prison system?
Do you want to say something about the 5-year for voting?
Yeah, I'm against that.
You're against that, so you would keep the prohibition, okay.
You're right.
Thank you. If you just tuned in, I want to make sure that everybody knows who's who on the panel. So looking to my left is Mr. Dore, Mr. Godot, Mr. Rance, and Ms. Thompson. They're all running for District 31 Legislature. Then Leslie Bork, who's running for District 43, then Jean-Paul Coussin, and Ms. Rhonda Gleason, who are running for District 45. So we appreciate them all being here and answering these questions. They've been put on the spot, not knowing the questions that we're answering. Now we're going to ask a question that is dear to the hearts of the people in the College of Liberal Arts, and I'm sure you'll see why as we ask it. For the first time in a long time, the legislature allocated a few dollars for higher education operations. It also funded TOPS. However, we have to go back to the Blanco administration to find the last time the Louisiana legislature funded pay raises for instructors and professors in higher education. Surely, 11 years of wage stagnation for these professionals is enough. What is your proposal, or what efforts will you support to raise Louisiana's higher education salaries to at least the Southern average and repair the damages of the past 11 years? And this question goes to Ms. Thompson.
Okay. I really can appreciate this question as an educator myself. I actually had a conversation with several teachers yesterday afternoon about how in Louisiana the only industry where education is valued is education. I think if we want to increase those, not only in our state, retaining those students of our best and our brightest to come to our universities, as well as recruiting from other states, we have to have the best and the brightest professors here. And one of the ways that we keep them here is by giving them more money. I hate to see wonderful professors, and I came here to school and did have wonderful professors that opened my eyes, and I got a wonderful education. I also had a wonderful, high school education. But, when they're struggling to make ends meet, that's just, it's sad. I see others who want to go into academics, and they're having to debate on if that's feasible for them to be able to have a family and be an educator at the same time. I think we need to focus on things that we do well here, bring in technology here, and make it more appealing for our professors to stay, give them pay raises, and bring them up at least to the average in the South here. And then that'll bring in more students will bring in more money, and we'll be able to create that cycle. It's just like any other business.
Thank you. Ms. Borg?
So I feel that education is the greatest investment that we can give to our state, and it trickles down to everything else, every single thing. If we don't keep raising our academic standards, our children will not stay in the state. That's just a fact. Our living wage is not something that now is doable for our graduates to remain in the state. So I do feel that allocating funds for teachers, they need to be paid, and we need to constantly keep raising the bar. We need to compete with other states. And at this point, our higher education, sure, TOPS was, is great, but if our kids don't stay here, then what are we giving them? I feel like teachers are the pivotal role in our kids' lives, and if we aren't compensating them for their jobs, then what are we doing? Education is something we can't bargain with, and I feel that we need to have a living wage, a minimum wage, so our kids can go to school and try to keep getting, better certifications, raising their education level. If we don't have ways for them to pay for this, then they won't stay here.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cousin?
Dr. Cross, the stat that you cited is simply unacceptable. It's unacceptable knowing that we have the largest budget in the history of the state of Louisiana this year. So, with our leadership over the last 4 years, we have looked at executive budgets, we have passed legislative budgets through much compromise, that we pass a budget each year. Okay, the budget has gotten passed. I think it's time to prioritize a pay raise for our professors, and it has to go through the higher education system, which is funded as a line item on the budget. We don't have a line item that we vote on, as far as I know, that has professorships underneath it. But knowing that we increased the budgets for higher ed this year, I think we now we have to look at the great universities like what we have here in Lafayette, UL, and we have to use UL as an example of utilizing our physical plant and other, in a cash-strapped situation, leveraging the assets that we have to bring in more money to our university through research grants and whatnot. But we need to help you. We need to fund the colleges. We need to continue the funding that we had this year, and then we need to hold them accountable to make sure that you all get pay raises. And there's not much more to say about it than that.
Music to my ears. Ms. Gleason?
So we took a hit in higher ed during Bobby Jindal's period. And I'd like to think that our legislative body would work with our governor, would work with our constituency, would work with our higher ed folks. But it hasn't proven that there hasn't been proof that could happen. We had the hardest time even giving a small increase in our public school teachers' salaries this last legislative session. So, the idea of increases coming now to higher ed, I'm a prayerful person, but sometimes we need to take action. If we don't have a competitive university system, I don't even know why we haven't. We should have been talking about this a long time ago. But these hallways haven't changed much since 1978 when I was running around while Dad was in his PhD program, and they certainly haven't changed when I was here at UL as an undergrad. I joke that my first husband and I divorced because of the hit that Jindal put on us. The idea of a faculty member getting tenure these days is a dream. Young people who want to go into academia, they don't see a future there. That was my dream, and it's hard to come by. But academia is the heart of democracy, and we need to bolster that.
Thank you. Mr. Dora?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I guess the first question was, about higher education and funding of higher education. Of course, I don't think there's anyone at this table that would say that we don't want to continue to fund higher education. Because it's very important to us that we produce quality and strong students from our universities throughout Louisiana. I think that's really important to us. You talked a little bit about TOPS. Yes, I absolutely support TOPS. The challenge that I see with TOPS-O is that there's no end game insofar as students can just blankly have TOPS, but there's no accountability that if they were to quit, do they pay that money back? Where do our tax dollars go? If they fail, where do our tax dollars go? So I think that needs to be addressed and have some discussion around that. As far as the wages for the Southern average, I think it's really, as someone said earlier, it's almost embarrassing that we're not up to the Southern average. We should be at least on par with other universities that are around us. There's no doubt about that, given the fact that we have one of the best engineering departments in the entire United States. And I think we have some other very highly ranked departments as well. We certainly have to have some of that go toward higher education. The question for me, though, is about accountability and tenure. Unfortunately, I'm not a big fan of tenure. Just like in a business, if I'm not performing and if I'm not being held accountable, I can be released. And I think that's somewhat of a challenge that we see here. But that's just some of my input on that question.
Thank you, Mr. Dora. Mr. Godot?
Again, as I've stated in the beginning, I have several family members that are close to the educational system. And one of the first things you ask them, and this last raise they got, they said that all that did was help me with one more tank of gas. It's reality, and we must face it. All our educators need raises. I've been speaking this for a while, but now that I've been meeting with my constituents and hearing what they have to say, not just the educators, constituents themselves, they feel the pain. Talked about this $500 million surplus again. Another area we can make good use of that. From higher education to kindergarten, everything is vital and important for the production of our kids, get them the jobs they need to stay in Louisiana again.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rentz?
Unfortunately, over the last 11 years, like you're talking about, and maybe even prior to that, education has really been more about enrollment. We've seen kind of an arms race for enrollment at LSU, to name a few. And that really isn't what higher ed's really supposed to be about. It should be about finding where a student's passion and interests intersect with their talents, and that's how you find a career. And that takes people. That takes teachers. It takes good teachers. It takes well-paid teachers. 11 years, the cost of schooling has gone up. Fees have gone up. As Jean-Paul mentioned earlier, there's more money now than there's ever been. And I think the problem goes back, as it always seems to find its way, to the agencies in charge, the agencies of government. And we have to do our best to peel back those layers of bureaucracy. And we need to prioritize our spending. I still believe that it's people, not money, that'll change this world. And it's the same is true for education. Thank you, Bruce.
All right, thank you. And now we have finished the questions that we prepared, so we're going to move to the lightning round. And in this round, we would like to just have a yes or a no, or as short as you possibly can answer. I know this is difficult in some cases, but let's try to do it. And we're going to start the lightning round with Ms. Borg. This first question is on redistricting. Will you fight to keep our Acadiana representation together by not dividing up our congressional district? Yes or no?
Can you repeat it again?
So the legislature is charged with redistricting, and that includes not only the districts that you're currently running for, but also the congressional district, so the district that Congressman Higgins represents right now. So in redistricting, those districts can be carved up based on demography and population moves. So would you swear to keep that district, the Acadiana district, the Southwest Louisiana district whole, or do you think it's open for dividing?
Yes, I want to keep it whole.
Keep it whole. Mr. Cousin?
Yes, and redistricting is one of the most important issues that we're going to face over the next 2 years.
Yeah. Ms. Gleason?
I agree that redistricting is very critical, and we have a gerrymandering issue that we need to address. So I can't, there's no promise regarding what those lines should be right now.
Okay, Mr. Dorey?
Yes.
Okay, good. Mr. Goodo?
Yes, I do, but it's going to need some tweaking.
Okay, Mr. Rentz?
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Thompson?
I agree with Ms. Gleason that there's some gerrymandering issues, so I think it would depend on how that falls. I think it should be fair representation.
Okay, thank you. Next lightning round question, and this one goes to Mr. Cusson. Recreational marijuana, yes or no?
No.
Okay. Ms. Gleason?
Recreational marijuana just like that, or
Just
the
like that.
legalization of marijuana? Well,
Just
I
like
think we
that.
need to legalize marijuana.
Okay, I would say that's...
I'm not a recreational user, but I think it should be legal, yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Dorey?
No, thank you.
Okay.
But I'll pass.
Mr. Godot?
No, thank you.
Mr. Rantz?
No, there's plenty of opportunity for that in other states.
Okay. Ms. Thompson?
No.
Okay, Ms. Bork?
Yes, I believe that this would be an opportunity for revenue for the state that we much need.
Okay, good. This next question goes to Ms. Gleason first, and that is climate change, threat to Louisiana's way of life, yes or no?
Yes.
Mr. Dorey? Climate change, threat to Louisiana's way of life or no?
Well, I think there's some contributing factors that, that may be done with human activity. So I'm kind of a yes, no.
Yes, no, that's a...
So I guess I could say yes.
You're sounding
I
like a
mean,
politician already.
well,
I
I
don't
could
know
say-
what
well,
to say.
well,
yeah.
there are a whole host of factors to look at. Let's face it, it's not just that black and white. We know that. But do I think people contribute? Of course we contribute some, of course. we do.
Okay, Mr. Godot?
I'm going to have to agree with a little bit with Jim there. Take a ride to Lake Charles, and I think that's a factor right there of how you can make some exception to it. But overall, no.
Okay. Mr. Rantz?
Can you restate it?
Yes, I can. Climate change. Climate change, threat to Louisiana's way of life, yes or no?
No, I do not believe that.
Okay, Ms. Thompson?
Yes, with every rainfall.
Okay, Ms. Bork?
Yes.
Okay, and Mr. Cusson?
No, I don't believe that.
Okay. This one is going to
we
start
say
with
anything
Mr. Dorey, and we are talking about your choice in the governor's race. John Bel Edwards, Eddie Risponi, or Ralph Abraham? Mr. Dorey?
Is that really a fair question?
Right?
Can you really ask me that in
You
public?
didn't say it was
I
fair.
think I can.
Well,
Sure.
yes, you can. I think that's a personal. I think-
Okay. You don't have to
It's a
answer.
personal-
You can say I
Yeah,
pass.
sorry, I'm ready to do that, sorry.
Okay. Mr. Godot?
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with him. It's a fair question to ask, especially from your constituents. But when the runoff goes, I'm going to be the one that's going to be against the Republican in the race.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Rantz?
I'm for anybody but John Bell.
Yeah,
There
okay.
you go.
Thank you. Ms. Thompson?
I'm for John Bell.
Okay. Ms. Bork?
I'm for John Bell.
Okay. Mr. Cusson?
I'm for either Congressman Abraham or Mr. Risponi.
Okay.
That's better stated, thanks.
Ms. Gleason?
I'm voting for John Bel Edwards, but if I win the race, I will work with whoever the way I need to as a representative. But I'm voting for John Bel Edwards.
All right, thank you. Well, now I would like to, I think we may have a couple of minutes left, so I'm hoping that we could take some questions from the audience, and if you could, if you have a question, if you'd raise your hand, and we'll try to recognize you, and you can ask a question at this point. This is your chance, maybe your last chance, to hear what these candidates for your legislative district might answer about a question. So we're looking for people who have questions. I see a hand back there. Is that Susie? Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Dr. Garcia. Okay. What act will you take as a legislator to end the scourge of violence? Gun violence, the scourge of gun violence, and we start with Mr. Dorey, I believe. Is that right? May have lost my count. Oh, sorry, Mr.,
Yeah, I think it's.
who was the last person that answered?
On the rapid fire questions.
Rapid fire.
Oh, me?
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry, Pierce.
Gus Rance, go ahead.
I think the best thing you can do about gun violence is to stop letting criminals have guns. I don't think your facts are accurate about the scourge that it is on children. I think it's an incredibly emotional issue. It's absolutely devastating, but statistically, you're not correct. That is not a scourge on our nation right now. Safety in the streets, you're much safer with people like me having a gun than without. And statistically, that we're a safer community now than we were 100 years ago.
Thank you. Ms. Thompson, gun violence?
As an educator, I hate the fact that I have to take a portion of my class time every year and go through safety drills with my students. I believe that school should be the one place that they feel safe. I think that we need better protection at our schools, but I don't think arming people, especially teachers, I thought that was a horrible idea when they mentioned arming teachers. I don't think the fact that two people have a gun necessarily makes it any safer. I think you can ask the people of Parkland who found that an armed officer didn't make anything better. There's been plenty of shootings at churches where there were security with guns that did make it safer. I don't think it's the fact of who has guns. I think part of it is what kind of gun. This is the sportsman's paradise, but I don't think, and don't get me wrong, I love shooting for sport. But I don't think it's sport when you have to release 50 to 100 rounds in a minute. I think if that's what it takes for you to be able to get a good deer roast, maybe you should go to Helos instead. Like I said, you said it's not a scourge, but my kids ask me every year what would happen if someone came on this campus, and I tell them they have to come through me first.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Ms. Bork?
Well, I think that this has become an epidemic, and whether you call it national or domestic terrorism or mental illness that we're not dealing with these people that are shooting in schools, that are shooting in movie theaters. We had one here in Lafayette. It's really, really bad, and we all know this. So I think for me, it's reaching over the aisle to the other party. If I keep saying red and you keep saying blue, or vice versa, we're never going to come to something. There are kids dying. I have a 6 and 8-year-old, and it is dreadful that I have to worry about them being in schools. I personally had made sure that the school that they were in before got locks on their doors, because this was something that was so dear to my heart, to make sure kids are protected.
Thank you, Ms. Bork. We're going with 30
And
seconds.
by the way, you just
on
don't
these.
want me to have a gun.
We're going with 30 seconds on these, okay? Mr. Cousin.
I think the question was, what will we do as a legislator? And I really think that although this is a legislative question, we have to look at the Lafayette Parish's approach, which I think has set a fine example for the rest of the state and perhaps the rest of the nation. So as a legislator, I would make sure that the locals were on top of the best practices, and in Lafayette, I think we're setting one of those best practices. I would look to our Lafayette Parish School Board and look at their best practice and look at how they're working with our school resource offices, look at how they're working with our school administrators, and look at how they're working with our sheriff's office on their response time, which was, I think, in this case of the Lafayette High School issue, was a good example. Although it was very difficult for the students and the parents, it was a difficult issue, but it was handled like it needed to be handled. So I would look to the locals first, starting with Lafayette Parish.
Thank you. And Ms. Gleason?
I was at Lafayette High School when we had our all-day lockdown, hard lockdown. And our police and security of all different kinds showed up. They did a fantastic job. I was there for 5.5 hours. Other friends of mine were there a little bit longer. I was in the legislature fighting for the banning of the bump stocks, and we won. So yes, our constituency does want some level of gun violence prevention. Our constituency in Louisiana does want smart background checks. That is a national yes. I am a Southern gal. My son hunts. I'm a 4th generation Air Force family. If we had 100 of our military dying every day like we do here in this country by gun violence, that is a fact. We would be throwing fits across this country.
Thank you, Ms. Gleason. Mr. Dorey?
Yeah, thanks. First of all, I look at root cause of what's happening around us. So I think we need to have what's called a collaborative effort. We need to work with focusing on, first, mental health. To work with mental health professionals, we need to work with our law enforcement officers to take a look at methods that we can identify individuals and be able to work with and through issues with them before it becomes a big issue. We need to look hard at what's happening with the drug industries that are around us right now, and they're basically industries. We need to look hard at all that as well. But we need to work, I think, from a legislative perspective with each of those entities, work collaboratively to come up with a unified plan.
Thank you, Mr. Dorey. Mr. Godot?
Again, I'm going to revert back to my 19 years of law enforcement. As a legislator, I'm going to meet with the school boards. I'm going to meet with the state police. I'm going to meet with everyone that's going to have a professional image into this. My son is a school resource officer, so I know the problems that lie there. I know them as my tenure in law enforcement as well, too. It's not a gun issue. It's a culture issue. I can remember back, and I'm sure everybody up here can contest, how many of us went to high school with guns in our truck, shotguns? Way back when, it's there. So it's not that there's more guns on the street.
Different kind.
It's how they're being used.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for maybe one more question if we do 30 seconds. In the back, yes, sir. Okay. Yes, that's true. No, I don't think it was clarified before time. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess we would need to have permission from
What?
the candidates here that, well, it was stated beforehand that the questions were going to be put together by College Liberal Arts and the Power Coalition, but in asking questions from the audience, we're obviously not conforming to our own.
I have no objection to the
Does anyone on the
format.
panel have an objection to questions from the audience?
No, we're good.
Okay, so one more question. Chris, did you have a question? Go ahead.
Yes. Someone in my Democratic Party told me this morning that we needed to have a poll of the party before we could talk about abortion. But I'd like to talk about abortion. Some facts. 10,000 women in Louisiana seek abortions every year. 60% are African American. African American women make 47 cents on the male dollar. This is the lowest.
This is a question, right?
Yeah, there's a question.
Okay.
And two-thirds.
She's an
of those
academic.
on Medicaid. I will leave it at that one. My question, with the legislature having passed an incredibly cruel and punitive bill against abortion, what will the candidates do to help women, children, and families survive and thrive in this new environment, if it passes?
So the question is, what will help women and children thrive in this new environment
If the abortion bill stands.
if the abortion bill stands, which was the heartbeat bill that passed? Is that the one you're referring to? I think we start with Ms. Thompson, 30 seconds.
Okay. I am opposed to the heartbeat bill. I do believe that people have good intentions, and I am a Catholic myself. I don't think anybody wants anyone to have an abortion, but I can't actually ask someone to have a baby and then not give them resources to support that child, to give that child an education, to have food, clothing, shelter that's all safe and fair, and then also ask them to be able to continue to contribute to society in a meaningful way without giving them some type of support. I think that is ridiculous.
Thank you. Ms. Bork?
I think the heartbeat bill was extremely harsh when it comes to rape, incest, and I believe that part obviously should not have been in there. If this does get passed, we need to be more proactive on educating children, those that are of age to have sex. We need to prevent abortions. We need to make sure our kids are equipped with the knowledge and the resources before they even get into that situation.
Thank you, Ms. Bork. Mr. Couson?
Thank you. I was proudly pro-life. I'm proudly 100% voting with Right to Life in the state of Louisiana. I've worked proudly across the aisle with Senator Katrina Jackson, who's a Democrat, fighting for pro-life issues over the last 4 years. Regarding the specific question, I was proud to vote for the bill this year, which was part of that 100% voting record. But it goes back to the standards that we set for the state of Louisiana, the education standards, the barriers to entry for employment. We increased funding for early childhood education this year, which was a fight. It was part of that fight for the education funding going to the MFP. We had to fight for the early childhood education money to be put in there. Fight. So we got $20 million to early childhood education. That was a huge step for the state of Louisiana, and that's going to help those kids that we're talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Cuso.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Gleason?
We need to have accessible and age-appropriate education for our young folks, male and female. I wish we lived in a perfect world where, pro-choice males and pro-choice females, kind of just stuck together, and we just let folks make up their own minds and decide about, their own bodily autonomy. But evidently, we need to bring this into the political forum, and I think that's a manipulation of a right that we already had existing. Many of us know people. I think the number is, and we all know 4 people who have had to make that choice, and we love them. And I don't think that this is the right forum for that discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Gleason. Mr. Doré, same question.
Yes, the first thing is prevention, right? And that is through education. So we need to do a much better job of educating people as to the consequences of their actions. That's the first thing. I'm like John Paul Cuso. I'm pro-life, and I've worked with the Right to Life group. I've got their seal of approval, if you will, or their stamp. I've actually met with the Zormo Foundation. I've toured that location. It's a great place to go. And I think if you haven't been through it, no matter what your party is, go visit the Zormo Foundation. But I also believe that we have to have some way and means of funding these individuals who may have these children and don't have the support. So we have to work toward that. But I'm definitely pro-life. And if you look at the statistics and we talk about incest and rape, I think it's like 0.2% of the population. So it's extremely low.
Thank you,
So I need
Mr.
to
Doré.
look hard at that.
Mr. Godot?
100% pro-life. And to echo what Jim said about the Zormo Foundation, it's great. Anybody has the time to go tour it, you really need to tour it. It's a great facility, and it's a lot of good things going there.
Thank you, Mr. Rentz.
I think it's ironic we get this question on the heels of the gun question. Yeah. Because, which is actually a right. There's at least 100-fold more deaths in the abortion industry than there are from guns. I'm all about upholding the right of children to survive and thrive in the new environment. That's a pro-life stance. We're talking about fringe items, the incest issue. That's a separate issue. Health of the mother, that's a separate issue. But writ large, that's not what we're talking about when we have this conversation. That's what we use as an emotional argument. I'm pro-life.
Okay, thank you. And now we come to our closing statements. So we have 1 minute each for closing statement, and we'll start with Ms. Gleason.
There's so many things I want to say. Louisiana is ready to move forward. We have an infrastructure that is ready to evolve toward green energy. We have families that are ready to move forward and to make the decision to stay here in Louisiana. I do not want to be a FaceTime grandmother one day. I want my children to be able to stay in this state that I love, that I've always loved. But this is the election for Louisiana, top down, from Baton Rouge to Lafayette. We've got to get folks out voting. You've got to get out to vote between now and Saturday. Make sure you appear to vote on October 12th if you miss this early voting period. And look us up. Find out who's running in your district, and vote for progress in Lafayette and in Louisiana.
Thank you, Ms. Gleason. Mr. Cuso?
As we sit within stone's throw of the oil center I want to make sure that that label is not a vestige of the past. Lafayette Parish still, to this day, has the highest number of oil and gas workers in the state of Louisiana. We have $800 million in wages coming to those workers, $2 billion in state taxes being paid by the oil and gas industry statewide. We need to de-weaponize the state of Louisiana against the oil and gas industry, and that does start with the top. We need to get rid of these oil and gas lawsuits and coastal lawsuits against the oil and gas companies. The two Republican candidates have both stated that their first order of business will be possibly through executive action or legislation to do away with these oil and gas lawsuits and to get Louisiana back to work, and that starts here in Lafayette with the heart of the oil and gas industry. I'm looking forward to working with those candidates to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cusson. Ms. Bork?
So the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. We all know that. I think that from speaking to my constituents, people are wanting change. They know that if we do the same thing over and over with the same mindset, we're not going to progress forward. I am not bought by anyone, and my one agenda is Louisiana. And this is for my family, for your family, for the pride that I have in my state and my hometown and this city and my district.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Thompson?
I think all roads lead back to education. We have a preschool to prison pipeline. Our prison beds are made for the next 10 years based off of third grade reading scores. We need to invest in highly effective educators, and part of that investment does concern wages at both high school and higher education. We need in-school counselors and nurses who are there to provide all day long opportunities for these students. We need to destigmatize mental health. I'm not for the legalization of marijuana, but I am for the decriminalization of it. And as far as our oil and gas industry goes, we have a survivor of the Deepwater Horizon right here in this room, and I suggest everyone take a turn and go and speak with him and see what we need to do to improve not only we're talking about lawsuits, but how about the safety and make sure that our people here in Louisiana are being protected from this industry too.
Thank you. Mr. Rance?
There's a number of things that we'll disagree about, maybe till the end of time, but there's also a lot of things that we agree on. And that's what your job as a legislator is. If we all agree that something's a priority, then we need to make it a priority, we need to act like it's a priority, and we need to fund it like it's a priority. In my business, I've rebuilt a company from the ground up. It's a learning experience. And when that happens, you have to dump the box of bills and receipts on the floor, you sit down and you make tough decisions. It's hard. It's a job, but if we do our job, Louisiana will benefit for generations. And we deserve it, and our children deserve it. We're a great state, great people. We're honest, we're hardworking, we have a great future. We're good cooking, we're good looking, some of us. We're God-fearing, and our government should reflect its people. I'm asking for the opportunity to help lead the state to the greatness it's capable of. I'm Gus Rance. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Godot?
Since I was at the age of voting, there's one thing you keep hearing constantly over and over again, every year, the cliche candidate. It's getting repetitive. It's time to make changes, it's time to make things happen. We have over 50 seats of legislature changing over. Now's the time for change. I'm going to reduce prescription costs. We're going to fix the insurance premiums, both medical and for auto. The infrastructure with roads and bridges has to be taken care of. We're going to live within our means. We're going to have physical responsibility. We're going to fix the education system. We're going to have less government, business-friendly climates, no new taxes, we're going to have a new tax code. Legislator to help small businesses with employment issues. I have 4 bills proposed already that I'm a sponsor to get going forward. I also have a resolution to the Basin Bridge problems. Everybody knows 1 or 2, 3 accidents, Basin Bridge gets shut down. I have a resolution that's going to work, and it's going to be self-funded. Oil and gas industry is going to be protected, ending legacy lawsuits. For every 1 regulation, I'm going to get rid of 2. My motto is I have an open line, open mind. I'm going to be the voice of the constituents, not the voice of the government.
Thank you, Mr. Godot. And lastly but not least, Mr. Doré.
Yeah, thanks. I left my briefcase in the back, so I didn't carry my notes, so I had to write mine. So, but the fact of the matter is, look, I grew up in an oil and gas family, and you know we struggled through life like a lot of us here on the podium. The thing for me is going to be the fact that we have to focus on bringing oil and gas jobs back here to Louisiana. The legacy lawsuits and the coastal lawsuits have all but devastated our industry. We have now people moving from our state, and I doubt they're going to come back without some significant job opportunities. We have to take a hard look at tort reform. Every time I drive down Highway 90 or Interstate 10, I see someone standing on a truck or doing some commercial that says if a truck passed by you, you're welcome to sue them. We've got to stop that. We need a more friendly and business-friendly environment here in Louisiana, and we don't have that. We've got to reverse it and make it easier, not harder, to do business here. We need to take a hard look at what we're doing with our tax structures. We need to make sure that we're actually inviting companies to come here. I think we need some sort of tax incentive programs, but I think we also need to look at those that are existing businesses here and give them some sort of tax incentive to stay here in Louisiana. We can't continue to lose those. And I think the other part of that would be the educational system, and I would agree for sure and absolutely that we need change, and we have some change sitting here and some Republicans, and I think we need to take a good hard look at Eddie Risponi and Ralph Abraham.
All right, thank you, Mr. Doré. And thank you for listening tonight, for listening on, watching on TV, for being here tonight. I'd like to thank the College of Liberal Arts for sponsoring this, along with the Power Coalition, our Timekeeper, Assistant Dean Sally Donnellan. Thank you, the audience, for coming and listening to this and considering this in terms of your upcoming vote for the legislature. And now, if we could all give a round of applause to our candidates for their participation. And lastly, but not leastly, I'd like to thank AOC Community Media for putting this on and recording this so that other people who are not here can hear it and learn from it, hopefully. Have a great night.